con el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogarplenitud.org.es, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, Serenidad.es, Permasalud Glamping, permasalud.com.
Hello and welcome to New Age. Today we have a very special program because we are going to share with you an interview with G.E. Stinson, founding member of Shadowfax. And we will share also the music of this wonderful and amazing New Age band. But before we start with the interview, let me tell you a little more about Shadowfax. It was a New Age electronic musical group formed in Chicago in the early 1970s and best known for their albums Shadowfax, The Dreams of Children, Too Far to Whisper, The Odd Get Even, among all their albums. In 1989, they won the Grammy for Best New Age Performance for their album Folk Songs for a Nuclear Village. And we will definitely talk about it with G. Stinson in the interview. In 1993, they were nominated for the Grammy for their album Esperanto. The group formed in 1972 and disbanded in 1995 when lyricon player and leader Chuck Greenberg died of a heart attack. Having lost their signature sound, Shadowfax members went on to their own projects. We have lost not only one but three members of a former Shadowfax band, and G. Stinson is one of the founding members of this amazing group. We were lucky enough to connect with him to give you and offer you this amazing interview, very emotional interview, and the music that you will get a deeper glimpse, a deeper experience of the amazing journey of Shadowfax. We will be back shortly with the interview. We will have subtitles in Spanish, and I'm grateful if you share, comment on our video in Vimeo, where we will have the full show with the music. We will also have just the interview in our YouTube channel. And also we will have the full show with the music in Spotify and iBox. So welcome to our show. Glad you can be part of it. And thanks for listening and sharing. We'll be back shortly.
Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como GoyPazR, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad S. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
Estás escuchando New Age, el programa de la nueva era.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, we have today G. Stinson with us. He's part of Shadowfax, and we are going to be able to talk with him about the group, about the group's history, and see how everything happened about Shadowfax. So thank you very much for accepting the interview. And I'd like to start, since you were part of the group since the beginning. How did the group come together?
And thank you for having me, Gloria. I appreciate it. We were all living in Chicago at the time, mostly doing blues and jazz. This is in the early 70s, probably 1970, like 69 through 73. We were all playing in blues and rock and jazz bands in Chicago, and we knew each other. Actually, Phil and I, the bass player, had played in a blues band together. And then I decided I wanted to do something more challenging musically. The musical environment was changing quite a bit in those days. and there was a lot of really fresh new music coming into existence, and I was listening to it and being inspired to want to do something beyond blues and rock. And so I knew Chuck from playing gigs together, and I just said, I want to start an instrumental band, and are you interested? And he said, yeah. So we started the band, and then we got Phil, and we rehearsed together with a bunch of different people, and then finally found Stuart and our first keyboard player, Doug Malechnik.
Yeah. The first.
No. This was long before Armin.
Oh, okay.
This was a guy that Doug and Stuart were from New Jersey originally.
Okay.
They actually came to Chicago to join the band, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And they all worked on the very first record, Watercourse Way.
You know, Watercourse Way is a... It's a very... did you have the name Shadowfax for Watercourse Way, or you didn't have the name Shadowfax yet?
No, we had the name before Watercourse Way, but just before.
Oh, really?
We did not have a name for the band until our first gig, and we were kind of desperate for a name. We couldn't think of one.
And how did it come up with Shadowfax?
Well, Phil Magini's girlfriend at the time was reading Lord of the Rings. And she said, oh, I have an idea, Shadowfax. And we all went, what's that? And she said, oh, it's this wizard's horse. And we went, oh, that's great. That's perfect, you know. So we settled on Shadowfax. You know.
Oh, great. Now, Watercourse Way, what was the intention for this album? Because it was completely different from the rest of, most of the rest of the songs of the albums that you played. It was kind of rock and, you know, it was dense in
yes.
ways. So,
yes.
What was the intention to do this album?
Well, we were all inspired at that time by a lot of the new, more adventurous, challenging music that was happening in the early 70s, late 60s, like Miles Davis, mm-hmm. Weather Report, Mahavishnu Orchestra, bands like that. Oregon, I don't know if you've ever listened to Oregon. Yes. Those bands were all like very, very influential. We were all familiar with like more traditional jazz, and some of us had been working on that music. Like I had been studying Charlie Parker's music, and we were really trying to just like, we were inspired by all these very adventurous musicians who were doing new music that had never really done before, never really happened before. So, we just, kind of, and we also had like a lot of interest in world music. That was a thing that was really opening up at that time, like with the Beatles and George Harrison and Ravi Shankar, all these other world music influences were coming in, and we loved that stuff. We were very inspired by it, and we used to sit around listening to it. And so our intention was to just basically try and do something that was new, that had never been done before, that incorporated all the music that we loved from, and trying to sort of like stay in that vein of new, adventurous, challenging music.
Mm-hmm. Now, the one of the songs that is in the album, that's the one we're going to listen, which is Petit Obed.
Yes.
It's very different from the rest of the album. What was this song about?
Well, basically, it was about my love of early music, of early music, Renaissance music, and things like that. We all loved that music too. We were listening to everything. Imagine a bunch of young rock blues guys, being exposed to all this music we've never heard before, and kind of falling in love with all of it and trying to figure out how to put it together into one cohesive statement, Well, I don't think we really succeeded, but we tried really hard.
Well, this is a very extraordinary song. That's why we're going to listen from this album, Petit Obed. I don't know if it's Obed, Obeid.
Obad. Obad is yes, and it means Obad means a small song, a small song.
Yeah.
Obad means a song, Petit, a small song for the morning. That was basically
beautiful song.
Thank you.
We're going to listen to the song from Watercourse Way. It's a 1976 album. And then we'll come back with GE to continue this journey through Shadowfax music. ¿Qué tan valioso es el programa New Age para ti? Desde 1988 hemos ofrecido música, contenido para el despertar de conciencia, introspecciones guiadas y entrevistas a personajes destacados. Ahora te ofrecemos opciones en distintas plataformas para que lo escuches o lo mires a tu propio tiempo. En estas épocas de grandes cambios, participamos con energía, decisión y temas importantes para sacudir la conciencia que te apoyarán en esta transición planetaria. Te invitamos a convertirte en patrocinador de New Age con el monto mensual de tu preferencia. Tu contribución es muy importante para la continuidad del programa. Puedes aportar a través de PayPal o transferencia directa a nuestra cuenta bancaria. Con tu patrocinio cubriremos los gastos de producción, plataformas pagadas y nos ayudará a expandir los mensajes que ofrecemos. Agradecemos profundamente tu apreciación por lo que compartimos. Estarás presente en cada programa. Okay, G, how did you connect with Windham Hill? Because after this album, everything kind of channeled through Windham Hill, mostly.
Yes. Well, that's a really funny story. Because, how will I start with this? Alex DeGrassi was in London playing in the Tube, like busking, on the street in the Tube, playing guitar. And a friend of ours who we would eventually meet named Robert Herman, who was a South African singer and songwriter, heard him and made friends with him. They became friends. Robert eventually moved to Los Angeles, and he met Chuck, our horn player, and told Chuck, "Oh, you need to meet Alex DeGrassi." So Alex got together with Chuck, and Chuck ended up asking Chuck to play on his record Clockwork. Yes. And that's how Will heard Chuck in the lyricon as he was like listening to Alex's record. He said, "What is that instrument?" And Alex said, "Oh, that's Chuck Greenberg. That's the lyricon." And then Will asked him to play with him. And then eventually Will suggested that Chuck do a record for Windham Hill. And he said, "Well, I'd like to get my band back together," because at that time we were on hiatus. We had kind of split up for a little while. And I was still in Chicago, and Chuck and Phil were in Los Angeles. And he called me up and said, "Do you want to do a record for Windham Hill?" And I said, "Sure," And then he said, the caveat is it has to be mostly acoustic. And we always had an acoustic side, so that wasn't really a problem for us. Yeah.
Wow, what a beautiful story, because, I mean, one of the signature sound of Shadowfax was the lyricon. And I remember back then when I did my New Age show in the 80s, I remember reading that Chuck created the lyricon. He invented. He didn't.
No, he didn't invent it, but he was one of the first people to play it, musicians play it live. Uh-huh. And it's very funny because that came about because I was looking at Downbeat magazine, and we were a very electric band at that early version of Shadowfax. Mm-hmm. was very electric, very loud, really aggressive kind of music. And Chuck was still playing acoustic instruments. And I saw a little ad in the paper, in the Downbeat magazine, for the Lyricon. It was going to be at the NAMM show, which is the National Association of Music Manufacturers, right? And I showed it to Chuck, and I said, "You should go check this out." And he did. And he met the guy who invented it. I can't remember his name now. He's from Boston. I forgot his name. But he ended up getting a prototype and worked very closely with the creator of the Lyricon to refine it and make it better. And it ended up being his signature sound.
So maybe that's what it was that he participated in refining the sound of the Lyricon.
Oh, yes. There were a lot of there were a lot of issues with the lyricon in the beginning. It was a very sketchy instrument. There was problems with it. So there was a lot of troubleshooting and input from a working musician was very valuable for them.
Yeah, but because I haven't heard the lyricon played after Chuck anymore, actually.
Only a few people have ever used it.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. It's amazing. So the second album is Shadowfax in 1982.
Right.
And it had a total turn in the music. What made the group take this more easy listening tone?
It was basically the fact that Windham Hill was an all acoustic label.
Yeah.
When Chuck called me, I was still in Chicago, and he said, I have this opportunity. It's on a record label, but they're an all acoustic small label, so we would have to do certain things, and it wasn't really a big deal to us because we always had an acoustic side. And Petito Bod, for instance, and the song Watercourse Way. But all we needed to do was just sort of like allow a little more space in it. And by then we were more mature as musicians, and we were sort of okay with doing whatever we needed to do. And more than okay, we were happy to do it, because it gave us an opportunity to reform and record a record.
Yeah, because it's a big change from Watercourse Way all the way to Shadowfax.
Yes.
And that's where it probably started for you, the kick into the instrumental New Age world. But it was, this album had something to offer that was really delightful to the ears of the New Age world. And from then, a mixture of rhythms, because I know in the States they have an idea that is was very bad publicized for the word New Age, but it's only there because elsewhere it was just magical music like the ones you guys did. And,
right.
The people from Windham Hill had amazing artists that were creating this base for the New Age world that was not just birds singing or melodic music for massage or something like that.
Right.
What people stick to. But it's not so, it's more than that. New Age is like, the classical music is not just Beethoven. It has many musicians and different kinds of music. So it was very powerful music that you guys created in those days. And this album, Shadowfax, had amazing songs. Like the ones we're going to listen are Angel Flight, Bahra, and 1,000 Teardrops. Do you have any memories that you can recall about these songs?
Yeah, I have many memories of that because that recording session was remarkable in many ways. First of all, we hadn't been playing together for several years, and I had to come out to LA. I was living in Chicago, and we were recording it on a very small budget, and basically, Chuck was just really starting out as a composer, but he was, he was really writing some nice pieces, and kind of, like we would sit down and he would show me what he had written on a piano, and then I would learn it on guitar. And it was strange for me because Chuck had never really been much of a composer before that. Most of the songs on Watercourse Way were written by me. But that recording session was crazy because we had such a small budget and we had to get a lot done in a very short period of time. So we really jam-packed a bunch of work. We burned ourselves out doing that record. But it was, when we were done, we thought the music was amazing. And Vajra, for instance, was a song that I wrote because I was very interested in Indian music at the time. I had studied sitar, and I'd also heard Alex DeGrassi's record that Chuck played on. And so I was like, Chuck said, how about we get Alex to play on this too? I said, that'd be great. I love Alex. I mean, I still love Alex. He's a genius, brilliant musician. So he came in and played on that. But we also had the amazing experience of having this incredible percussionist come in and do all this African Balinese and stuff crazy, who played on all of our records in those days.
You mean Stu? Somebody else besides Stu? Or
yes, it was. His name is escaping me now. But he was a magical musician, and he was Emo Richards. If you hear the song, on Vajra, you'll hear a weird sound at the end that sounds like a dog, like howling or something. That's Emo Richards playing the little log drum in this very unique way. He was a genius, brilliant guy. He's passed away, unfortunately. He's very, very. He filled the studio with all these instruments from Africa and like Indonesia, and just did these magical things, absolutely magical things.
Wow. Yeah, because from this album on, it was like a totally different direction from Shadowfax, and it got better with every album.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
That's what we were trying to do.
Yeah. So why don't we listen to those songs, Angel's Flight, Basha, and Thousand Teardrops, and we'll come back to talk about Shadowfax, the next album.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Permítenos acompañarte con New Age.
Okay, G, tell us who were the bases for Shadowfax? Because there were musicians that came and left, and they were part of it, some records, and then they left. But there was a basis of musicians that were there for most of these albums that we're going to talk about.
Right. That was me and Chuck Greenberg, who was the woodwind player, Phil Magini, who was the bassist, and Stuart Nevitt. We were the four members who sort of remained constant throughout the whole thing. And all four of us were original members going back to the band in 1975 and 76. Yeah. So, and we had different violinists and different keyboard players at different times.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I felt. But it was good that you share that now. As I perceive that what you said, that you were the mentor to create Shadowfax, or did just come up, a couple of you got together and suddenly the band came with the whole concept of Shadowfax?
Well, it took a little while to form. The idea originally of doing an instrumental band was mine, and I immediately talked to Chuck. Because he was the one person I knew at that time who was more familiar with like more adventurous jazz things. He'd studied John Coltrane and Ornette Coleman and things like that. And Phil I'd already played with in a band. So he was a natural choice, to join the band. So basically Chuck and I started, and then we started playing with Phil. And the music was still forming. It was in a very kind of like formative stage. It was not really defined. But at that point, I was the only person writing music. So it was mostly my music. And then slowly but surely, Chuck and I would collaborate on things. He would, and then eventually later, the other guys would start writing. But yeah, we were just, like trying to do something new, and something we'd never done before. We didn't think it was new to the world, but something we'd never done before.
So for the album Shadowdance, there's a very interesting song that I remember listening when I saw you guys, saw the band in San Jose, which is Karmapa Chenmo, the Brown Rice song. I think it's Phil Magini who says, Brown Rice.
No, that's me.
It's you. Oh gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah, actually, There's a video of us doing that at Wolf Trap, the big classical venue in outside of Washington D.C. No, that's a Don Cherry song. You know Don Cherry, the trumpet player. He played with Ornette Coleman, and then Don was really the first guy to kind of incorporate a lot of different world musics into one thing. He did an album that almost nobody knows called Relativity Suite. He had traveled around the world, Africa, Indonesia, all these different places, and he came back and composed a suite of music that had all those elements in it. And when we first heard that record, we were blown away by it. We just thought, oh my God, this is the gateway opening when we'll go in afterwards, you know. So we just started incorporating as much world music into it as possible. But that song was actually, it's a combination of two different Don Cherry songs. Brown Rice was one that was on a record. I don't even know the name of that record, to be honest with you.
I mean, but it was in Shadowfax, but also I think in a compilation record for Windham Hill. That might be true. That's probably true. Yeah, but we used to do that way back in Chicago before we were on Windham Hill. We used to do those two songs together. So this is actually two songs together because it's called It's Brown Rice, but it has the name of Karmapa Chengmo there. Is this any Tibetan monk that was influential in the group?
Well, I'm a Zen Buddhist, right?
How cool.
But Don was a Tibetan Buddhist. Don Cherry was a Tibetan Buddhist. Okay. And I eventually met Don through a percussionist that I knew named Adam Rudolph. And he ended up playing with us at one point, Don Cherry. And he was the person who was introducing all those Tibetan elements into the music. And so it was a natural for me because I was already a Buddhist. I knew what it was, and it was easy for me. The other things that are in there are very interesting. The words are like an old African American skip rope chant. You know what a skip rope chant is? No. When girls play skip rope. Yeah. Yeah. Well, black girls used to do this chant to keep the rhythm. 3, 6, 9, the goose drank wine, the monkey chewed tobacco on the streetcar line, stuff like that, and that's where some of that came from.
Oh, how neat! Now, Shadowdance, if I recall, has sort of like a Chinese influence. It's a different song altogether. It's very world music in this album, but. What can you tell us about Shadowdance?
Well, Shadowdance was basically Chuck trying to write an Indonesian gamelan song, right? But with his own kind of voice. And we all had been listening to that kind of music for quite a while. So when we heard what he was doing, everybody knew exactly what to play, But really what made that song come alive was Emil Richards, the same percussionist that had been on the first record, came back. And by this time we had a bigger budget. So we went into a major studio in Hollywood, and Emil basically filled the place with percussion instruments, gongs, all these different things from Indonesia and these like strange marimbas and wonderful things that he had. And he basically sort of added all those sounds. It made it sound so Asian and sort of, un-American.
Yeah, well, it's a great song, and it has all these elements that, it's very particular. It's very particular.
Yes. Sound. Yes, very specific kind of thing. Yeah.
So from Shadowdance, we'll listen to Shadowdance and Brown Rice, and we'll be back to the dreams of children.
Respira profundo y fluye con New Age.
It seems that, as I mentioned earlier, Shadowfax is going up in how the quality of the sound was coming through. And the dreams of children, it's amazing amazing album. Another amazing album.
Thank you.
What was the inspiration for The Dreams of Children?
The album. To make the best record we could possibly make, considering what we'd already done. And, like we were now at the point where we were having, quite a bit of success and playing larger venues, touring all the time. And the other thing was we finally acquired an engineer, a recording engineer, who was then doing our live sound, who was recording our records. So we were beginning to get a consistent, good quality to the recordings, in the production. And we were getting a little better at doing the production ourselves, because Chuck was producing the records, but we were actually all involved in that. If it was your song, you were involved in the production.
Yeah.
So basically we were just trying to do a better record than the one we'd done before. That's all every record was, let's do a better record than we did before, so, but the title there's an interesting story about the title, The Dreams of Children, which was a song title that I came up with. And I had sort of I came up with the title and I went, oh, okay, write that down and keep it, store that away somewhere. And Chuck had written this song that sounded like a lullaby, like a child's lullaby, right? And I said, you know what? I have the perfect name for this song. And he said, what's that? I said, The Dreams of Children. And he said, oh, that's great, And then we were on tour. We were going through Big Sur in California. And there's a gallery there that has watercolors by Henry Miller. You know Henry Miller?
Yep.
The painter-writer, right?
The writer.
He wrote Tropic of Cancer. He was also a really good watercolor painter. And there was a piece in there called Childish Dream. And we both looked at it at the same time, went, oh my God, this is the album cover, Windham Hill was not totally receptive to the idea right away. We had to kind of convince them that it was a good idea because they had a certain look. I don't think they'd ever used actual art. They'd always used photographs that had a certain vibe to them, but they eventually went along with it.
Yeah, it's a perfect cover for that album. I mean, it's my sense as a listener is that Shadowfax was going like this, and every album was better than the one before.
Yeah, that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah, and so in this album, there are more songs that were more engaging for the audience, and so. I don't know if you have any stories or you recall anything about another country which was very popular, Snowline, Dreams of Children, evidently, and Word from the Village. It's another song that we're going to play from this album. Any memories from that?
Well, all of those songs were okay. Well, you said another country was that actually ended up becoming a theme song for a PBS radio show called All Things Considered, which was great. I mean, we were getting played on PBS on a daily basis, or a weekly basis anyway. The other song, Snowline, was just Chuck, I think, trying to, he had spent a lot of time in Northern California, and he was trying to kind of capture the sort of a sonic version of certain landscapes that exist in California, where you're up in the mountains and you're at the snow line, below a certain point and it's a beautiful, I don't know if you've ever been in those kind of environments. Well, Ecuador has got the Andes, right?
Yes.
So, if you've ever been up in those places, they're just absolutely spare and beautiful and amazing looking. And he was basically kind of trying to capture that. Word from the Village was once again me trying to channel my love for African music into a song. And we had a friend from Chicago who was a blues singer named Cash McCall. And Cash McCall had been our mentor and good friend for many years. And Phil suggested, "Oh, let's get Cash to come in." I said, "Yeah, we'll get him to sing on this song too." So we did that together. Just trying to have fun and get everybody involved.
Yeah, this is a wonderful music. So let's have the audience listen to this from this album, all the songs that we've mentioned: "The Dreams of Children," "Another Country," "Snowline," and "Word from the Village."
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Respira profundo y fluye con New Age.
Okay, now that we are all the way to 1986 for Too Far to Whisper, how did the group evolve to create this album? Because, for me, Too Far to Whisper is the peak, even beyond the folk songs from Music Nuclear Bridges that you got a Grammy. For me, this album, Too Far to Whisper, was amazing from beginning to end. It was just,
Thank you.
Oh, I was in awe
Thank
when I
you.
listened to it. So,
Thank you.
Maturity from the group, how did it come up? How did you come up with Too Far to Whisper?
Well, at this point, we've been touring for many years. We've been touring for probably 4 or 5 years straight. And we played in Japan, we played in Europe. And we were touring probably 8 months out of the year. So we were firing on 8 cylinders as a band. We were tight. We knew exactly what we were doing. We knew how to get things done, and if somebody had a vision, we had a process where, here's a song. We knew how to make it become reality. And everybody was really good at contributing, to whatever parts were needed. There wasn't even really a lot of discussion about, what anyone would play, like if there had been before, where we'd be talking about what are we going to do on this song. People just come to rehearsal. We start working on a song and it just took the shape of its own because the band was really tight and really together and very much, the road had brought us together in a really, really strong way. So we were kind of really good at what we were doing at that point,
Yeah, it's really a powerful album with so many, like songs like the Orangutan Gang, and at the same time Tsunami and Too Far to Whisper, that so many ups and lows and it's just an amazing album. So we're actually going to listen to the whole album in a couple of segments. So
oh wow.
Is there any song that you recall from this album that was really impressive for you or that has a great memory?
It's funny. I don't remember which songs are on that record.
You want me to tell you?
Yeah, which ones are on there?
Okay, so we got Too Far to Whisper, What Goes Around. Who's singing? Is that you singing in What Goes Around Comes Around?
Yes, that's me. Yes.
It's a very, very zen song, very beautiful, amazing song. Then China. So we'll go by parts. The first part, we're going to go through Too Far to Whisper, What Goes Around, China Blue, and Orangutan Gang. Those are the ones that. What do you recall from these songs?
Well, Too Far to Whisper was a love song to someone that I had a platonic relationship with, who had been an old friend of mine from Chicago, and then she moved to Florida, and her husband died from brain cancer, right? And she had a son, and she was living there by herself, and I hadn't seen her in years. And she came to our concert. We were playing in the city where she lived in Florida, and we reconnected just on a sort of soul to soul level, and she'd been through a lot of really tough stuff, but she was just this incredibly buoyant and beautiful person. And when I left, I was really sad. So when I got home, I said, I'm going to write a song for her. And, I never put her name on it because, it didn't seem appropriate. But I told her, I said, this is for you. And we would talk on the phone, if she was going through a rough time or something, she felt down, we would talk on the phone. And sometimes it'd be late at night, and I'd be whispering in the phone. And one time I said, you're too far away to whisper, and that's where the song title came from.
Wow.
And what were the other ones? Oh, What Goes Around was basically, I've been a singer like for most of my life. Although at one point I kind of gave it up and wanted to do just instrumental music. Well, the first Shadowfax record has a vocal on it that Watercourse Way does. So I really wanted to do something again that might have a kind of, that would fit into what we were doing at that time. So I was kind of trying to, bring all these elements together in a way that would be like a cohesive, almost kind of like just a beautiful song, that, and, you have to understand it was the 80s and it was a crazy time. There was a crazy, crazy things going on in the 80s. Not as crazy as now, but, it was, there were, and I thought, like if I can light a candle for one person, that'll be enough, So
yeah, well, the lyrics for the song are very, very deep. What goes around comes around, and how you talk and share the ideas of the song.
Yeah.
And you have a song called Boomerang that we will listen to, and I was thinking it's sort of like a boomerang. What goes around comes around. It's exactly like that. But it is a beautiful song. And how about China Blue and Orangutan Gang?
Well, those are China Blue is Phil Magini's song, and Phil always had sort of gravitated toward these Asian melodies for some reason. I'm not sure why. But he had this like fascination with those kind of melodic aspects, and that's where that came from. And Orangutan Gang was David Lewis's song. He was the keyboard player who came to the band a little later. And, we instantly recognized that David was a really good writer, and he was very adept at doing certain things on synthesizer and keyboards. And he introduced that song, and we were like, okay, this is right in the ballpark, so let's go for it.
Yeah, I remember that we used to mix it and play it with Elephants in Love by Jean-Luc Ponty. And it was just perfect, it's like this African animals and the rhythms, they were so cohesive. So it was beautiful to put them together in the show. So Orangutan Gang is a wonderful song. It's a very, very happy song.
Yes.
Okay, so let's listen to these songs and then we'll continue with the second part of For to Whisper.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Abre las puertas de tu mundo interior y permanece con New Age.
About Road to Hannah, I believe it was Charlie Bisharatz who composed it, but it's also a very soft, beautiful song. He was already part of the album and with his violin. And how was his collaboration with the group? His influence in the music? What do you recall from that?
Well, he, before playing with us, Charlie had been more of a fusion jazz guy doing that kind of thing. But he knew that once he was with us, it was going to have to be more sort of dialed into what we were doing, with all these world music elements. And he came up with that song, as a piece of music that might fit in. And the minute Chuck and I heard it, we were like, oh yeah, this is perfect. This is perfect for us. And, a lot of people think that song is about the road to Hana in Maui, which is a road that goes across this tropical landscape to a town called Hana in Maui. But it's actually about his grandfather. His grandfather's name was Hana.
Oh, how beautiful.
So it's actually an homage to his grandfather.
Oh, how beautiful. It's a beautiful song.
Yes.
So, anything about... Go ahead. What were you going to say?
That song is actually one of my favorite songs from that record.
Yeah,
I think that's so beautiful. Such a beautiful song.
Beautiful song. And anything about Street Noise and Slim Lims Akimbo?
Well, Street Noise was just us trying to rock out because we were those kind of musicians too. We weren't all new, like all this soft kind of mellow stuff, and Street Noise was just, oh yeah, let's do something that rocks out, and Chuck had written this song and it was the perfect thing to rock out on, Slim Lims Akimbo. I can't tell you where that title comes from.
Funny.
That's Stuart Nevin, actually.
Really?
And and Stuart was one of the most singular composers in our band, as far as I'm concerned. He was just the weirdest composer. When he didn't write a lot of music for a long time, but then when he finally did come up with songs, I thought, well, nobody's going to write a song like that. It was completely, unlike anything we'd done before.
Yeah, it was quite a song. So we're going to listen to the songs before we come for the last part of Too Far to Whisper.
Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como Hoy Paz R, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad EC, en WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
Este es el espacio de New Age.
What can you tell us now that we are in the last part of Too Far to Whisper about Tsunami, which I believe was composed by David Lewis?
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about? Yeah.
All I recall about Tsunami was that I loved it the minute I heard it.
Yeah.
And Dave and I were really close at that time, and he would always play songs for me first, because the first song that he actually did in the band was the big song, which we wrote together, right? And Dave played the song for me, and I said, dude, this is a great song. This is an absolutely great song. I mean, he'd written good songs before, but this one to me was like way better than anything he'd done before. And I called Chuck and I said, Dave's got a really good song that we should consider putting on the record. And once we all worked on it, it turned out to be one of the, that's a great song.
It is a great song. And, it's something I was sort of, since I interviewed Michael Manring and Will Ackerman as well. And and I was noticing that 1986, when this album came through, was a very powerful year for Windham Hill in terms of the quality of albums that were launched that year. It was very magical. It was a very magical year.
Yes, 86 was a pinnacle year for Windham Hill.
Yes, definitely. So I don't know about how this album did in the charts or how was accepted, but how did the group felt about this album, Too Far to Whisper?
We thought it was a good record at the time. And, more and more we were writing songs that we could instantly play on live, whereas with some of the earlier stuff, it was much more challenging to do the things that had all this percussion that had been brought in, that we couldn't bring all that stuff on the road with us. Mm-hmm. So the later records were just the band really kind of doing songs that we could instantly play live. And some of them we played live before we recorded them. So, yeah, it was just it was a natural evolution that was really easy for us at that point.
So now we're going to listen to Tsunami, Maceo, and Ritual. I think one of those songs is yours. Ritual, I think it is, right?
Ritual?
Ritual, like,
Ritual.
Ritual, there.
That's a. I think Chuck and Phil and I collaborated on that, and that was basically also us trying. We were listening. We had been working with this South African singer, and so we were really like listening to a lot of South African music at the time, and we were trying to figure out a way to. We didn't really, because that employs an mbira, which is a thumb piano from Zimbabwe, which is not South African.
Yeah.
But it's nearby. And we were just trying to get like that feeling of some of those incredible vocal songs that came out of Africa, basically. And Chuck had come up with the idea, and I said, well, let me, I can do this mbira part. And then we got all together and sang the chorus part on it, the choir part on it.
Great. Well, thank you much for sharing all about Too Far to Whisper. We're going to go to listen to these songs, and then we'll come back for Folk Songs for Nuclear Village.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces, este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Estás escuchando New Age, el programa de la nueva era.
So, we're back to the next album, which is Folk Songs for Nuclear Village, that won a Grammy Award for Best New Age Album in 1989. Why do you think this award was given for this album?
Can I be honest?
Sure, yeah.
It was based on our track record, not the album.
Okay.
The way the Grammys work is that people who vote for the Grammys are members of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, right? And I was a member at that time, right? Most of the people who were in the organization did not have any idea what was going on in music, in contemporary music. They were older members that had been there for a long, long time. They'd been in the organization for many, many years. And they weren't really listening to contemporary music. They were not listening to Shadowfax at all. But what happened was, I think it was like 2 or 3 records previous to that had been nominated for a Grammy, but hadn't won. So I think the voters in that organization had seen our name over and over and over again, and they were probably beginning to see us hear us on the radio, hear about us in the media, et cetera, and that's how that happened. It was like, you persevere, and eventually you may win a Grammy.
Yeah,
basically that's how that works.
Yeah, I always wonder how that worked, because I've seen albums like Too Far to Whisper. It was just amazing. Though maybe the year that competed with so many good albums, it was difficult to get a Grammy. But, it works in a different way, as you mentioned. So it's interesting to know how that works, because Folk Songs from Nuclear Village is an interesting album. But I think that Too Far to Whisper was much, much bigger in terms of the content of the whole album. And do you agree with me?
Absolutely.
Oh, good.
To me, and I'll be honest with you, Folk Songs is my least favorite Shadowfax record of all time. And when we won a Grammy for it, I was actually shocked. I was kind of surprised. I was like, wow. Well, and I said to Chuck at the time, I said, this is weird to me. And he said, well, just think of it as a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah. Which
I was like, okay, well, I can live with that. You know what I mean? So, but
what happened? What happened
That record,
with the group that I went so high with Too Far to Whisper and then back to Folks from Nuclear Village was not as complete as the previous album.
well, that's a complex but story. But first of all, at this point in the band, we've been on the road for 8 years, and we're starting to burn out, you know, and we're starting to get on each other's nerves, you know. I spent more time with the guys in Shadowfax than I did my own family, you know, and the easiest way to say this is, the other thing is that we had been on Windham Hill and we had a great relationship with Windham Hill, right? When Will Ackerman was there, it was fantastic. It was wonderful. You could call Will on the phone. He would take your call, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know, Will decided to leave Windham Hill, and then they hired a bunch of LA music executives to come in and run the company, right? Now, they came to me and Chuck and said, well, we can't afford to pay you the royalties we've been paying you. And and they made us an offer. And we were like, why would we take this? This is not as much as you gave us on the last record we did. And it wasn't the same. It was not the same thing anymore. It wasn't the same label anymore. You know, Will was gone. So basically we decided to go see if we could get a record deal with someone else. And we eventually signed with Capitol, which unfortunately was a mistake. Capitol was not a good choice for us. And the band members also kind of made this, because we were not in a great space with each other, that our family was kind of falling apart. We had decided to hire an outside producer, you know, and that was also a mistake. We shouldn't have done that, the guy we hired was totally unsuited to be a producer for our band. It was David Kirschenbaum. And, you know, it was not he did not do a great job with us. He basically didn't do anything, you know, and we struggled to get that record even finished. I actually gave up writing any songs for it. We were also having trouble with the record company. Capitol was being really awful. They were not helping at all. And eventually, you know, we did another record for them, but they wouldn't release it, you know, because Folk Songs, even though it won a Grammy, was the worst selling record we ever did. Yeah. And I think it's telling because it's not a very good record.
Yeah, that's why, you know, I was so surprised that it would get a Grammy for that album and not for Too Far to Whisper. But such is how things work, and still, you know, there were some songs that are interesting, like, you know, I chose Solar Wind, Against the Grain, and No Society to share from this album. But obviously, as you mentioned, it was not as catchy as it was Dreams of Children and Too Far to Whisper, that were simply astounding albums.
Well, thank you. And I agree. We were fragmented at that point. We're all of us struggling to get along with each other. We'd spent too much time with each other. It was the 80s. So I have to also say that there was some bad lifestyle choices going on at the time. And that was impacting the band in a negative way. Mm-hmm. Too many years on the road was impacting us in a negative way. We had, you know, if you spend that much time on the road as we were, you don't have time to create. There's no time to regroup, you know, and create new music and allow it to grow and become something. So we were just basically throwing the record together as quickly as we could, you know, and meanwhile struggling with the fact that I was struggling with the fact that we were on a record company who didn't know what to do with us. Uh-huh. They had no clue what to do with us. You know?
And I was wondering, you know, while doing all this traveling, why did you take on so many tours? It was because you were popular and they were asking you to play, or was it an economic issue as well, that you would get rewarded economically for the tours and everything? What was it that kept you going on tours for so often?
Well, we loved playing live. We loved playing in front of audiences. That was always great. It was always very satisfying and very fulfilling, but, it was a lot of it was based on, like some members of the band who hadn't written as many songs were not making as many royalties as other members. So they needed the money, like personally, Chuck and I didn't really need the money. We could have taken more time off, but other members of the band, needed, that was our main source of income for a lot of the people, because we were making really good money for our live performances at the time, So basically it was that. The other thing is we kind of like, once you get into that grind of like recording an album tour, it just becomes automatic. You're like a machine, and you just do it because it's like the record company expects you to do it to promote the record, so you end up doing it, whether it's a good idea or not,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to listen to these songs that I mentioned, and when we come back, we'll get to the Odd Get Even. That was the last album that you participated with the band, and talk about it and see where it takes us after that.
Yes.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Respira profundo y fluye con New Age.
So the Odd Get Even was a 1990 album, and it was the last one you participated with Shadowfax. Did you leave because of things you mentioned earlier, that things were not... Why did you leave the band?
I left because... well, first of all, I was burned out on touring all the time. I was tired of it. Also, the fragmentation that was going on in the band was difficult. But to be honest with you, the main reason was that, when Shadowfax started, and my original idea to start Shadowfax was to have a band that was playing composed as well as improvised music. Now, we hadn't done that in years. We were doing it every once in a while in the studio when we were rehearsing. We would do improvised music. But for me, I had continued to do improvised music with other musicians. Now, at this point, I'm playing with some of the best musicians in Los Angeles outside of Shadowfax, and it was more challenging and more interesting to me than going on the road and doing these songs again and again and again, because it was musicians who were at that time far superior to me as improvisers. And it was kind of like relearning how to do that. And it was challenging and interesting and stimulating and creatively very fulfilling and satisfying. So I wanted to do that. So, once we got that record done, I left the band. Eventually I left the band, and I was reluctant to leave, because I was there from the beginning. Shadowfax was my idea, initially. Although it became something very different from what I wanted it originally. So I basically wanted to, do the most challenging music I could at the time and play with the best musicians who were not interested in making money. They were interested in doing great music, and that's what I did, basically.
Oh, it's very understandable. It's so much pressure and everything is breaking apart, and you can feel it from the previous album. And the Odd Get Even, I think it has a little. It's a better album than Folk Songs for Nuclear Village.
It's a much better album than Folk Songs.
Yeah.
There's some great writing on that album. It had a great producer, who was I can't remember his name now. His name escapes me, but. This is many years ago. Yeah. It's the 80s. I've forgotten some of these people's names. But yeah, and the producer really helped us, because he came in immediately, said, we're gonna like I'm going to pick the songs that I want to do, and which we'd never done before. We'd never allowed a producer to pick the repertoire, but he did, and he made great choices. And then he was a really good producer, and he knew how to get those songs recorded and produced exactly the way we wanted them to. The very satisfying thing about that record, and I love that record. I really do.
It is a great record.
Because everybody got to do what they wanted to do, but the record holds together as a cohesive statement, And that was really Bob. That was Bob, the producer, who was really great. He was a weird guy, but really great, a great producer.
Yeah, it is really great album. I loved Oasis, and there's a live version of A Pause in the Rain, that I think there's even a video that where Stu is playing these little things.
Yeah.
And that live version of A Pause in the Rain is amazing. It's really great. And this is the album where you have the Boomerang song. Yeah.
Well, I should tell you that one of the songs that I wrote on there, which is called Her Dress Hangs There, is a tribute to Frida Kahlo. You know Frida Kahlo?
Yes, of course. Oh, wow.
Because she had a painting called My Dress Hangs There. I don't know if you've ever seen it. And I absolutely adore that painting, and I absolutely adored Frida Kahlo. So I did this song. I said, I'm going to do this as a tribute to Frida Kahlo.
We'll include that song in this segment. We'll
cool.
Listen to that one. Oasis, A Pause in the Rain, but the live version that I told you, and Boomerang. And after this segment of music will come, so you can share us what you've been doing with your life after Shadowfax.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces, este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Respira profundo y fluye con New Age.
Okay, Shadowfax is over, and you continue doing all this music with different artists. What was your life after Shadowfax like?
Well, much more peaceful.
Yeah.
It became actually very satisfying and fulfilling, because not only was I playing with musicians here in Los Angeles who were challenging me as an improviser and as a composer, I was also getting more involved in Zen Buddhist practice. I was spending a lot more time practicing with Zen Buddhist teachers here, and eventually I would really dive into that very intensely in the early 2000s, where I would become I'm like a sort of deacon in the Buddhist church in a way.
Did you follow Thich Nhat Hanh? Did you follow any chance Thich Nhat Hanh?
No, my lineage comes through Japan, not Vietnam.
Okay.
But my friend Alex Klein, who is a drummer that I play with a lot, is actually a devotee of Thich Nhat Hanh, and I think I had something to do with that, because he was involved in something else, and I was heavily involved in Zen Buddhism at the time, and we'd having these really deep conversations about spirituality and things, and eventually he moved into the Thich Nhat Hanh community, and he's become a teacher there. So he's, but yeah, I was really spending a lot of time doing improvised music, creating things that I'd never done before, and like full-time Zen Buddhist practice. Yeah.
How did that mixture, how did the Zen Buddhism influence the music that you were creating?
Well, the Zen Buddhism is perfect for improvisation, because both things are about being present in this moment. Being present now. You have to be awake and engaged in every single moment as it unfolds, and you're never sort of with your mind, with your intellect, trying to change what's happening. You're trying to like sort of allow yourself into that flow of the present, and how it's always changing into the next present and the next present, the next present. Both of those things go together really well in terms of like their essence. Now, in terms of your time schedule, not so much. Because if you're practicing Zen Buddhism, you're getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, like because you're on monk's hours, and if you're a musician, you're staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning. So sometimes that didn't work out so well. I didn't get a lot of sleep at times.
Oh, well, it's wonderful. The mixture, probably that's what has you alive and well. Your Zen practice is what keeps you so adorable.
Thank you so much.
Now, I was wondering, how did you keep in contact with members of Shadowfax after you split? I mean, because eventually Chuck died and Stu died, and then you also mentioned Lewis.
David Lewis
also died. How has that impacted you? Because Shadowfax died as well, because there was no lyricon anymore.
Yeah. Without Chuck, you really couldn't have Shadowfax. They could continue on without me, but not without Chuck, so, and nobody wanted to do Shadowfax after Chuck died, to be honest with you. It was like, there was no point. But I did stay in touch. Chuck and I were not on the best terms at that time because the fragmentation that had happened really kind of, a lot of it had to do with me and him and decisions that he made that I didn't agree with, like signing with Capitol Records, which I did not want to do. I was against that. And Chuck was convinced it was the right thing, and it was a terrible decision. Now, granted, he'd made a lot of great choices before that, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. So I was sort of like, okay, let's see what happens, but it was terrible. It was a terrible idea. Capitol is a giant corporation. It's not the same as being on Windham Hill, So I wasn't in close contact with Chuck, but I was with Stuart and Phil. I hadn't really maintained contact with any of the other guys, although I knew what they were doing. I would run into them now and again. We were all living in Los Angeles together, so we'd run into each other. But then when Chuck died, we all did get together, to go to his memorial, which was terrible. I mean, I was heartbroken because we were still not on good terms when he died. So I died with a lot of unresolved issues. He died with a lot of unresolved issues between us, which was sad. I worked through that, and it's all good. His wife and I are good friends, and we get along fine, and everything's good. He named one of his sons after me. So, we were really, really close. So it was really devastating to lose Chuck, And then, not long after that, Stu. That was also terrible because Stu was younger than me. I always thought of him as my younger brother, So that was very sad. But I always stayed in touch with Phil. Phil and I go back long before Shadowfax, So we're still in touch now. I go up to his house and have dinner with him and his wife every once in a while. So
he also lives in the area.
He lives in the Hollywood Hills.
Oh, okay.
They have a beautiful little house up in the Hollywood Hills. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great. So nowadays, what kind of music are you doing? Are you still doing experimental music, or what's your music about now?
Well, up until the pandemic, I was doing a lot of free improvisation, very challenging, very outside, kind of very weird avant-garde music, which is for me really fun. I really love doing it, playing, and I've surrounded myself with a community of incredible improvisers, really, really great musicians. When the pandemic hit, everything came to a grinding standstill. All the venues closed. And unfortunately, most of the venues have not reopened in Los Angeles. Some of them have, but not so much. So I haven't really done a lot of live playing. So basically, I've been just writing music for myself and uploading it to the internet, and doing whatever comes to mind. Mm-hmm. I have done a few gigs with different people doing improvised things.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Now, to end our chat, our conversation, what is the nicest or the most beautiful memory you hold from your time in Shadowfax?
Oh, that's easy.
Easy, great.
Yeah, no, it's something, and most people would say, "Oh, it's playing at Red Rocks or playing Carnegie Hall or playing in front of, the royal family in Japan or, like all those things." But no, was not that. Not at all.
What was
I'll tell you the most beautiful memory I have of Shadowfax. It was one of the first tours we did after we'd gotten back together. It was like 1983 or 84. I can't remember. And in those times, we were really struggling. We were trying to just get by. We took a Winnebago with our U-Haul, thing on the back of the Winnebago and to do gigs. And we were in Northern California. And, we would rent one motel room, right? Because that's all we could afford at the time. And we would all sleep in the Winnebago and we'd take turns getting the motel room. And then we'd all shower in the motel room, and then hit the road and go to the next place. Well, one time we were up in Northern California in the Redwoods, right? We had done a gig and we went up there and we parked out and we were parked by this motel. And I remember this vividly. It's one of the most beautiful memories I have. I woke up in the morning and the windows were open and we were surrounded by redwood forest, right? In this little town in Northern California. And Chuck had gotten up early. And Chuck, at one point, had been like a chef in a restaurant in his early years. So he went to the store and he got eggs and toast and stuff. And he was in the Winnebago making breakfast for everyone. Right? And I may start crying if I tell you this story. Because it's such a sweet memory for me. And at the time, I thought, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced in my life. We were all together again after having been separated for so many years. We were on the road. We were playing music. The light was streaming in the windows of the Winnebago. Chuck was cooking eggs on the stove, and it was just the most beautiful thing ever.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I can feel you, and you took me exactly to that moment, and I am so happy that you can share that with us, and the emotion that it brings, so beautiful. So I wanted to thank you, and I don't know what to say. I've been touched by your story, and I've been touched by the whole conversation with you. It's been really beautiful. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for asking me to be a part of this. I'm so grateful that you've done this. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I will send you the link to the show so you can.
Oh, great.
You can listen and remember what we talked about.
I hope I'll be able to share it on social media.
Sure.
Great.
We're going to have it in Vimeo with the whole show with the music. We're going to have
excellent.
In YouTube, just the interview they don't allow us because of copyright. It's just the interview. Right. And then we'll have it in the audio for Spotify and iVoox.
So great. Excellent. All over. Great. Thank you so much. I am so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you too. And we'll be in contact then. Namaste.
Namaste.
Have a great time. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Con el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogarplenitud.org.es, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, serenidad.es, Permasalud Glamping, permasalud.com.